There's something particularly enticing about sitting around a nice, warm fire with a cup of hot chocolate or whatever takes your fancy and soaking in an enthralling ghost story told by a friend. Ordinarily, these stories pertain to the environments you find yourselves in. Maybe you're out camping, and suddenly the noises that occur around you become part of the story, and you find yourselves questioning, could any of what's being told be true? Largely, the answer to that question is a big whopping no, but you get the point. Now, the idea of a ghost story is not something you'd expect a science fiction spacefaring adventure game like Starfield to entertain, much less have one be present and then give it some modicum of credence. But that is exactly the story of the encounter that we're going to be talking about today. So please enjoy as we unravel the mystery of the Pale Lady. Now, whilst exploring the Starfield space can get rather lonely, that's why the game, on occasion, will shake things up with an encounter you simply weren't expecting to have. Whilst out in space, you can happen upon spaceships quite readily. Some will attack you, others you can interact with, but some appear to be completely derelict. Derelict ships are especially interesting and often come with their own stories to explain how they came to be how you find them. There are many of these encounters, to the point where searching for one in particular cost me my will to live, as an incredibly broad net of vastly different encounters all fall under the icon of ship. And because largely these can spawn wherever they fancy, tracking down an event remotely similar to exactly what you're looking for is an uphill battle to say the least. This particular derelict vessel encounter took me dozens of hours to actually trigger, and it became demoralizing when time after time, instead of getting new encounters, of which there are many in this game, you'd seem to get the same 5, rinse repeat. But eerily, just as I was debating giving up for good, I got it. Now, there's no point in me telling you exactly where I happened upon this encounter, because there is no real rhythm to where these encounters spawn, so the chances are, for you in your game, it will be somewhere else altogether. But for your satisfaction, I found it orbiting Mile 1 in the Mile system. Where it might spawn for you, I couldn't say. Everything I've seen about this particular encounter online states that it spawned somewhere entirely different. On your map, it'll appear as an ordinary ship encounter listed with the word ship, but it very quickly sets itself apart. Upon arrival, you're met with a derelict UC Longsword 3, but I have heard it can also spawn as a different 3-star collective vessel instead, which apparently glitches the full extent of the encounter, in which case you are shit out of luck. Ordinarily, from a derelict vessel, you anticipate to receive 0 communications, and in return the game doesn't give you an option to hail them either. But this one does actually appear to communicate. I imagine for some people that will be enough to cause them to nope out of the entire system, because there was an unmistakable hint of malevolence behind that cackle, and being stranded upon a dead ship in space is no laughing matter. Interestingly, for a derelict vessel, its name is highlighted in blue, which is only ordinarily the case for some active vessels. Maybe this is a response to the laughter over the comms that suggests that it might be. But in order to find out what exactly the crack is, we're going to need to board the thing. And in doing so, we will receive a new activity to investigate the ship. Upon entering, there are 2 ways we can go. We can head to the right, which will take us around to where the bridge or cockpit is, or we can go into a dead-end room to the left. If we set the investigation to our active quest, we'll get markers that tell us where we need to go, but you can't help but notice the bodies strewn about the place either way. But obviously the important thing here is the ship crew log 1.
So, have you heard about the history of this ship?
Oh no, you're not going to trick me again with one of your ghost stories. The last time I couldn't sleep for a week.
It's not a ghost story, I promise. Well, not a story anyway. I mean, you've heard this used to be a warship, right?
Sure, war ended, tech got old, we get the hand-me-downs. Nothing unusual about that.
Yeah, but the tech isn't old. And if you check the hull, the exterior's pristine, not a single dent.
Okay, smart guy. Then why did it get decommissioned?
Exactly. There's no reason a ship like this should be handed over to a crew like ours. But then, I got to thinking, what if this ship wasn't just any ship? What if it's the Pale Lady?
Stop it.
You know, the ship that was found in the void of space with its entire crew dead with no signs of foul play.
Stop it.
So I did some more digging and...
I said stop it. And if I ever hear you repeating this nonsense to me or anyone on the crew, I will take this directly to the captain. Understand?
Fine. I'll let it go. We still on for lunch, though? What? Okay, I'll leave you alone, jeez.
That idiot.
It's interesting this log mentions the Pale Lady was a ghost ship aboard which the crew were found dead with no signs of foul play, which is the same case here by the looks of it. This is the first body we've happened upon on this vessel. I have a feeling it won't be the last. It's quite clear the fella is dead, but it's not clear as to what actually caused him to die. Over into the room parallel, we will find 2 more bodies. I assume there's some random nature to how the bodies are laid out, but I found it interesting that this one was almost crammed successfully inside a box. Like the other one, these 2 bodies bear no hallmarks of foul play, they are simply dead, with no indicators as to how. This particular room doesn't hold much else of note, however, that will change in the next room where we will find 3 more human bodies, and once again there's no blood, no signs of foul play, they simply appeared to have dropped dead doing. On one of the bodies we'll find the next slate titled Insomnia, which reads as follows. Ever since Peter died, I've been having a hard time sleeping. The whole story about the Pale Lady was cute at first, but now I get startled whenever the ship creaks. Too many old bones in it and me. The doc says it was pneumonia. Really? What kind of pneumonia turns a man's face white as chalk? When we get back, I want to bring Peter's body to the clinic and get a proper autopsy. So we get some information about how these characters seemingly died, learning that they turned white as chalk. That's not necessarily the condition we find their bodies in, so I'll put that down to the technical limitations of Starfield, but it definitely validates the notion of a supernatural entity being the cause for this crew's demise. There is a computer in this room, but it doesn't appear to activate, so any information that might have been on that is certainly lost. But there is more, as we are yet to venture into the cockpit, for it's in here where we will find the second crew log, in the possession of a body crumpled up in the corner.
What did the captain say?
Their fever's still sky high, but they were awake long enough to mention that... I'm not sure how to say this.
No need to beat around the bush, Doc. Just tell me what they said.
It's likely just a hallucination from the fever, but they claim to have seen the same thing the ensign saw.
Does anyone else know? The last thing we need is...
Sir, are you alright? Sir?
What is that? Do you hear that?
Hear what, sir?
What do you mean? For God's sake, how can you not...
Sir? Sir!
Now, what you might have noticed is that laughter kicks in after the recording actually ends, meaning whatever was laughing then was not on the recording, but rather occurring in real time. It's that same creepy, echoey laughter that drew us towards this derelict vessel in the first place, and yet there is nobody alive aboard this ship for it to be. Furthermore, in the recording, one crew member can seemingly hear the humming and the giggling, whereas the other cannot. The only explanation that arrives off the top of my head is maybe there was some truth to these tall tales about the Pale Lady after all. And if these stories are to be believed, she has claimed another crew. But we're the player, she can't hurt us, right? Well, I hung around for a fair bit after picking up all of the data slates, and it appears as if we are perfectly safe whilst aboard this vessel. Even though, based on the information we're fed, the Pale Lady only reveals her presence to her victims, and she certainly revealed her presence to us through the laughter. But it is understandable if you hear the laughter and decide, you know what, I'm going to peacefully vacate this derelict, and then leave it alone, hoping to never encounter the Pale Lady again. But I do have some bad news, my friends. No, she won't latch onto your ship, don't worry about that. Rather, once you've left, if you listen to that data slate back, you will still hear her twisted chuckle when the recording ends. Anyway, this is not the only information that Starfield provides us about the Pale Lady. I don't know where this can be found in-game, but according to the magical land of the Starfield subreddit, thanks to a post by the user I Am Truth and Wisdom, we learn of a data slate that might be able to provide us with some more context. It's titled The Pale Lady, and this is what it says. In the void of space, it's not uncommon for tall tales to undergo a series of growth spurts, with so little to do and so much time to fill. Exaggeration proves far too tempting mistress, but the legend of the Pale Lady is not one that has grown vertical with time, but rather it has stretched sideways, passed around like a game of telephone until all that remains is the eponymous lady in white. I've heard variations where the lady was a machine, a ghost, and an asteroid field. They say old Earth tigers could mimic the sounds of other animals to lure prey, and it almost seems that the Pale Lady can swap origins just as seamlessly to create whatever collective panic she wishes to inspire. The only common denominator is the lack of survivors. Unfortunately, this also makes connecting these incidents to their origin nearly impossible. In my research, the oldest reference I could find was the following words, written in an explorer's log, which mentions a woman with a pallid face. In hushed tones we echo the silenced. Through ardent screams we give breath to the drowned. Invoke her name, for her pallor is light, and truth will find refuge in death's embrace. What we learn is the Pale Lady is something of an explorer's legend, and incidents like this have been recorded for a very long time. However, very few, if any, have survived an encounter with this being, and based on the information we're provided with, it appears we were spared her physical form, and that might be the only reason we made it off this derelict longsword alive. So you can thank the limitations of development for that one. But regardless, the ship is most certainly haunted, and the entity it hosts appears to target the crew of the vessel specifically. As we've learned, this has occurred in the past, and once the Pale Lady has killed the entire crew, she allows the ship to be repossessed and then given to a new crew, a new set of faces, a new selection of victims. A cycle that is sure to continue, as I can't imagine the masses in a spacefaring society that survived the extinction they would have faced on their homeworld would have much time for this particular facet of the paranormal. But according to the logs found aboard the ship, they know just enough to ensure that a vessel this capable and seemingly in good condition for the most part is given to crews who would not ordinarily receive a vessel so advanced. In other words, people who aren't deemed that important, which in this instance did raise some suspicion according to the crew log 1, but by that point they were already deep in space, trapped in this box with nowhere to run. From there we learned the Pale Lady picked off the crew members one by one, almost as if the confusion, the fear, the panic and the chaos was all part of the fun. Moving on though, if the name The Pale Lady sounds familiar, that's because Bethesda game studios are quite fond of that title. In the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion, the Pale Lady is a dark elf vampire who can be found hiding beneath Castle Skingrad, where she feeds on the blood of the prisoners. The Pale Lady is also the name of a quest available in the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, in which we must enter a crypt that has been disturbed by bandits, with the intent of either banishing or laying a spirit known as the Pale Lady to rest, which can be done by either placing the pale blade on an altar or simply killing the spirit. Now, it's unlikely that these are related to each other, much less the events that we've explored today in Starfield. But it's clear that Bethesda are awfully fond of this Pale Lady namesake, as an experience associated with that name has appeared now in 3 of their titles. But I'm wondering if there's any inspiration outside of Bethesda Game Studios behind this. Well, as it turns out, pale female ghosts are incredibly popular in folklore, associated worldwide with legends of tragedy and death, so narrowing that down is going to be particularly difficult. But these ghosts are more so referred to as the White Lady rather than the Pale Lady. As for examples of the name the Pale Lady appearing in fictional works that predate the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion, and the other Bethesda games in which the Pale Lady as a name shows up, I did find a couple of things. One was a book titled The Pale Lady, a gothic vampire novel from the mid-19th century, written by the French author Alexandre Dumas, and that could definitely hold some ground on the inspiration behind the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion's vampire named the Pale Lady. But the Pale Lady as she appears in Starfield isn't a vampire, she's more of a spirit, a ghost, something far less physically present. And that very quickly led me to a novel called Scary Stories 3, More Tales to Chill Your Bones, which is part of the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark series of children's horror books written by Alvin Schwartz. This particular entry was released in 1991. The book is broken down into a series of short stories, one of which is titled The Dream, in which there is an entity called the Pale Lady. Initially something of a foreboding character, this Pale Lady would later be adapted into a 2019 movie in which she's far more antagonistic. But in my opinion, the strongest correlation between that and what's going on in Starfield is the name alone. I think for the sake of the encounter, it's an easily memorable generic ghost name, and that's kind of it. Not that I'm awfully familiar with these other fictional works, but through the research I have done, I see the same name being used, but that's kind of where the correlation stops. The strongest link is of course to previous Bethesda Game Studios titles in which the Pale Lady has appeared as a name. So it could be a developer inside joke, or it could be a nod to some other work that's got a lot of appreciation from within the studio. As for Starfield though, the Pale Lady appears to be a name associated, albeit informally, with the ship itself rather than the entity that is killing the crew aboard it. It's clear that the entity behind these killings has done this several times over, and those we find are just the last batch of victims. No rational explanation is offered for the encounter we can have here, and considering some players have reported this encounter occurring aboard an entirely different class of vessel, this Pale Lady may not even be confined to just the one ship. So maybe the extent of what's occurred here is impossible to understand because the legend of the Pale Lady within the Starfield universe is exactly as the data slate puts it. It grows sideways rather than vertically. In which case, as fascinating as it is, this is truly beyond our comprehension. But I personally like to think that this specific ship is haunted, so with that in mind, no need to thank me all at once. Thank you all for watching this video. I really hope that you've enjoyed this exploration into one of the more interesting derelict vessels you can encounter out in Starfield. I wish I could tell you where to find this for yourselves if you haven't discovered it already. It seems some players get this encounter right out of the gate, whereas others have to play through hundreds upon hundreds of hours before this event even triggers. For me, it was certainly veering towards the latter, so I'm grateful to finally have this one done so I can focus on other things. Anyway, if you did enjoy this video, be sure to go ahead, leave a like, subscribe, share the channel with all your friends and all that wonderful stuff, if you want to, that is. And with any luck, I'll be seeing you all very soon with another video at some point. But until next time, please take care and goodbye.